Hello everybody, welcome to the Unforgotten channel. Today I would like to discuss Henry Louis Wallace, a notorious serial killer from the 1990s, and give a little background on him and his victims. Henry Louis Wallace, also known as the Taco Bell Strangler or the Charlotte Strangler, is said to be America's first known African American serial killer. He is suspected of 90 murders across the country, convicted of 9, and confessed to 11. He knew 10 out of his 11 victims and even attended a few of their funerals. Henry Louis Wallace was born on November 4th, 1965, in Barnwell, South Carolina. He is the son of Lottie Mae Wallace and allegedly a married school teacher who walked out of Lottie's life after finding out she was pregnant. In Barnwell, Wallace shared a home with his great-grandmother, mother, and older sister. The home he lived in had no plumbing and oftentimes no electricity. Lottie worked long hours at her full-time job, but the family still had very little money. When Wallace would outgrow his clothing, he would have to wear his sister's hand-me-downs. Lottie was described as a harsh disciplinarian who constantly criticized her son for even the smallest mistakes. When she felt like the kids needed discipline, and she was too tired to do it herself, she'd make Wallace and his sister get a switch from the yard to whip each other. Despite his troubled home life, Henry was pretty popular and well-liked at his high school. He was on the student council, and since his mother wouldn't allow him to play football, he joined the cheerleading team. He didn't make the best of grades, but received positive feedback from his peers, which made him enjoy his experience. He attended one semester at South Carolina State College and one at a technical college after graduating high school in 1983. During his time in college, he worked as a DJ part-time, which he really enjoyed to do, but the career was short-lived after he was caught stealing CDs from there. A few years later, he joined the Navy, and in 1985, he married his high school classmate. Not long after getting married, Henry began using drugs. To pay for his drug habit, he started to break into homes and businesses. In 1988, he was arrested for breaking into a hardware store and pled guilty to a charge of second-degree burglary. In February 1991, Wallace broke into his old high school and the radio station he once worked at. He stole recording and video equipment and was caught trying to pawn them. So now we have to rewind back in time to 1990. Henry's first victim was Tashonda Bethia, a high school senior who was born on February 13th, 1972 in Barnwell, South Carolina as well. Wallace was really attracted to Tashonda. People from his hometown would say that he had a huge crush on her, and they went on a few dates. However, the feeling was not mutual. She wasn't that into him, and this bothered him. On the afternoon of March 8, 1990, Tashonda went on a car ride with Wallace where he drove her to a wooded area outside of town and demanded sex. When she refused, he pulled out a pistol. After violating Tashonda, he feared that she would report the crime, so he decided to execute her and dumped her in a lake. She was not discovered until weeks later. Wallace was questioned by the police regarding her disappearance and death, but was never charged. He was also questioned in connection with an attempted assault of a 16-year-old girl, but was not charged again. Around the time of Tashonda's death, Henry's marriage had already fallen apart, and he was just fired from his job as a chemical operator. He then relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina in November of 1991. Sharon Lance was Henry's second victim. She was a call girl, and she was around the age of 33 and a mother when she was picked up by Wallace in May of 1992. When she demanded money for her services, Wallace fought her until she was breathless and dropped her body by the railroad tracks. She was found a few days later. It is believed that Sharon had only met Wallace that one time. In June 1992, Caroline Love became Wallace's third victim. Caroline Love was the roommate and co-worker of Sadie, one of Wallace's girlfriends, and they both worked at Bojangles. On June 19, 1992, Wallace let himself into Sadie's and Caroline's home. Sadie was out, but Caroline was home. When confessing his murders, Wallace stated that Caroline turned down his advances and threatened to tell Wallace's other girlfriends about him. That was enough reason for him to kill her. It is said that he took her body into his car in broad daylight to the outskirts of town. And 2 days later, after slaying Caroline, he went back to check to see if she was still alive and to admire his work. Wallace went with Caroline's sister to help file a missing report. She went missing for 2 years until her remains were found in 1994 of March. Shortly after killing Caroline, Wallace moved in with Sadie. Shauna Denise Hawk was born on December 2nd, 1972. She was the second child and only daughter of Dee Sumter and Walter Hawk II. She was smart, beautiful, and shy, and although she was only 20 years old, Shauna Hawk had a very good, simple life and touched the many people she met. She was just always her own sweet self and had a very good sense of humor. She was nurturing and loved children, and she spent a lot of time taking care of her godson. Friends called Shauna a saint, and Henry thought she was the one. He had met Shauna at a Taco Bell restaurant where he hired her. They had only gone on a date before, and they were only just friends. On February 19th, 1993, Wallace stopped by Shauna's house to hang for a bit. They chilled for a little bit, and then Shauna allegedly began to tease Wallace about a fight him and his girlfriend had had. Somehow that pushed the wrong buttons, and he hit her with an object and knocked her out. He cut off her breathing with a cord and then placed her in a bathtub. He then took $50 from her home and left. Audrey Spain was born on August 18, 1968. On June 22, 1993, she had just got back home from vacation when Wallace stopped by to visit her. He then shortly started demanding information from the safe where they both worked at. He also demanded her personal banking information. After she refused, he violated and slayed her. He placed her in the shower, trying to get rid of any evidence after. He then went through her home to look for the credit cards she once refused. Valencia Jumper was born on May 10, 1972. She was a very ambitious young lady who recently relocated from Columbia, South Carolina. She was a senior at Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte studying political science. She had 2 jobs, both at Food Line and a clothing shop, to pay her tuition. And she knew Wallace through his sister. On the evening of August 10, 1993, Wallace violated and executed Valencia after she threatened to tell his sister about his behavior towards her. He then ran through her home and set fire to her. A few days later, he and his sister went to Valencia's funeral. A month later, in September of 1993, he went to the home of Michelle Stinson, who was a 20-year-old single mother and a struggling college student. Michelle had 2 sons and was a friend of Henry's at Taco Bell. He violated her sexually and executed her in front of her oldest son. That October of 1993, his first child was born. He was still living with Sadie at the time, but it was not her child. On February 4th, 1994, Henry was arrested for shoplifting. Unfortunately, no connections were made with his murders. Vanessa Mack was a 25-year-old mother of two when she was met with foul play. She had met Wallace through her sister, who also worked at Taco Bell. She was discovered by her mom, who went to her house to pick up her youngest child. This did not make the news. To his next victim, Betty Baucom, a 24-year-old student and mother. She was working 50 hours a week to pay for tuition and described as an individual who could make you feel like $1,000,000. She worked at Bojangles with Wallace's girlfriend, the same place Caroline once worked. Betty lived in Lake Apartments in Charlotte. On March 8, 1994, Henry noticed Betty's blue 1988 Nissan outside. His excuse for knocking on her door was to use her phone. Betty let him in to use her phone, and in the midst of pretending to look up a phone number, Betty turned her back, which gave Wallace the time to place his hand over her neck and ask for the combination to the safe to Bojangles. After 30 minutes, Betty wrote down the combination on a piece of paper and questioned Wallace of his reason for doing what he was doing. He replied that he was sick and that he had hurt many people. Betty then told Wallace she forgave him, but he needed help. That angered him, so he pushed her to the floor where they fought. He eventually got the upper hand and took her to the bathroom, where he undressed her and violated her body and slayed her. Henry stole $80 from her purse, along with her keys, TV, and gun. He sold the items for drugs and later went back to her home and stole her VCR to sell that and to also make sure that she was not alive. Later that night, he got rid of Betty's car, wiping away evidence, although he forgot to wipe the trunk of the car. Brandy June Henderson was just 18 years old when she lost her life to Wallace on March 8, 1994. She was a sweet high school student and a mother of a 10-month-old. Brandy and her boyfriend both worked previously with Wallace at Golden Corral. On March 8, 1994, Wallace had stopped by earlier that night for Brandy, but her boyfriend was there. He then went on to Betty Baucom's house since they lived in the same apartment complex. He returned for Brandy knowing that her boyfriend wasn't there. Shortly after arriving to Brandy's home, he demanded money. She gave him the $15 she had and some spare change. He then took her to the bedroom and forced intercourse. He then slayed her with a towel after hugging her and telling her he wouldn't hurt her. Annoyed by the crying baby, Wallace then placed a towel around the baby's neck until he stopped crying. When Brandy's boyfriend returned home from work, he found Brandy's slain body and was able to get the baby to the hospital in time to save her. After the remains of two women turned up at the same apartment complex, police patrol grew in East Charlotte. But that still didn't stop Wallace from getting to his last victim, Deborah Ann Slaughter. Deborah also worked with Wallace's girlfriend along with Audrey Spain and Vanessa Hawk. She was 35 years old and the mother of an 18-year-old. Her remains were found on March 12, 1994. The following morning, after Slaughter's body was found, the police compared notes and noticed a link to the cases. The last three victims knew Wallace. They later discovered that he knew all the other victims as well, and they also found his fingerprints in Betty's car. They later arrested Wallace the same day, where he confessed after 12 hours to the murders. In the aftermath of Henry's rampage, the Black community in the area gave lots of criticism to the neglectful way the police and media handled the cases. They felt as if the ladies were not treated special because they were Black. Henry was able to slay 7 of his victims before the police even got serious about finding him. Henry is now in prison, waiting execution in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was found guilty on January 7, 1997, and since then he's been appealing to the courts to overturn the death sentence. Henry states that his confessions were made under pressure and his constitutional rights were violated during the process. On June 5, 1998, Wallace married a former prison nurse.